Okay, we are back to talk about Curb Your Enthusiasm, episode 2 of season 12, Lawn Jockey, which aired in February 2024, written by Larry David and Jeff Schaffer. Should probably more accurately say story by Larry David and Jeff Schaffer, and directed by Jeff Schaffer. In this second episode of the last season, after being arrested for giving a bottle of water to Auntie Ray, who was in a voting line in Atlanta, Larry David is released from prison, plans to plead guilty so he can put everything behind him. But his Atlanta lawyer, Joe, looks a lot like Mocha Joe from season 10. Larry hates Mocha Joe, so he eventually fires him after he starts talking to Larry about his coffee. At their Airbnb, an offensive lawn jockey in the front yard is there that Larry and Jeff break, so they are set out on a hunt to find a new one, with Leon joining them so that Susie does not have to pay the security deposit. It's also Susie's birthday. Jeff takes Larry's advice to buy her two gifts in case she doesn't like the first one. The guys finally track down through a very interesting set of circumstances where they end up, find out how to track down a new lawn jockey. They make their way to Auntie Ray's church cookout so that she can introduce Larry to all of her church members. Auntie Ray's nephew gives Jeff all the leftover ribs, but finds the lawn jockey in the back of their car, infuriating everyone at the cookout. Because of this, Larry decides to plead not guilty and stay and fight the Georgia election law. Okay,
Yeah,
so
some little
I
details and things you glossed over that maybe were
yeah,
just slightly inaccurate or something. But anyway, Leon also was involved in the breaking of the lawn jockey. For
that's
example,
right.
the
That's right.
three of them.
He's a part of that whole thing. He's involved in the breaking. He's involved in the searching. He's
Yeah,
involved in so much of this, which actually I'm glad you brought up Leon because it lends itself to a question I want to ask sort of about this show in general, which is about sort of the less scripted, more improv style of it. I mean, clearly this now over after 24 years is a show that's come to its end. This was a great show in terms of the improv because you clearly get these pieces in these episodes of Curb Your Enthusiasm that are completely improvised, completely just sort of outside and unnecessary to the story. There's one here with Leon where they're driving and they're looking for a lawn jockey, and he starts talking about why do we have just lawn jockeys? Why not lawn lawyers or
a
lawn
lawn doctor,
dentists? You know, all
lawn
these things
stethoscope.
that yeah. So, and you can tell based on the reactions, the authentic reactions from Larry and Jeff while that's going on. This is just, I mean, something that's causing them to break. This is not part of what the original intent was, but they leave it in. So, I guess I say that to say you've seen a lot of seasons of Curb Your Enthusiasm. The improv style, do you think this is something that I guess heightened the quality of this show? Do you think we'll ever see anything like it? What do you think of the improv sort of way that they approach this?
Well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, it is central, I think, to how the show functions. Um, which, as I recall, the very first episode wasn't even an episode; it was a special. It was almost like a faux documentary. Man,
Yeah, I
I
think
haven't watched
so.
that in years. I wonder
Yeah.
what it'd be like to watch that one now. But it started in that way. And I've got some behind the scenes knowledge going on here. Apparently, this was Jeff Garland's idea, and it was almost a happy accident that he found Larry David to do it
Yeah.
for the
Yeah.
initial uh, kind of special, and then it became this series. Of course, took on a life of its own. Anyway, I mean the improvisational style, I think, coupled with the fact that so many characters play themselves,
Hmm.
not everyone, but centrally Larry David, who is playing a version of Larry David, right? Like Richard Lewis plays a version of Richard Lewis.
Right. Right.
They're not actually themselves, but they're sort of are. Um, will there be anything like it again? I mean, I don't know. It depends what we mean exactly. I mean, I think
Yeah.
you could take that kind of style and you could look at how they made it and to make something similar. And then I don't know if it would feel like too much of a knockoff, or maybe it would just feel completely different because different people are involved to such an extent. I don't know. I mean, I think they play with stuff like this a little bit on It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, but not to the same extent.
Yeah. Yeah. I just have always, I think, appreciated not only that they were able to sort of take that path and do that, but put as much of that as they possibly could in each episode. This very much became a vehicle for just Larry David saying, we just want to do the things that we enjoy doing. And so this improvisational style, which led to conversation like the one we're talking about, always left in. It also leads to the whole storyline with him using the restroom in the store.
Yeah.
And that has zero to do with anything in the rest of the episode or moving forward any plot. But it's clearly something that's been on Larry's mind that he thinks is a ridiculous issue. So he wants to put it in an episode and just sort of see where it can go. So that just sort of was I think the two things made up the genius of this show for so many years.
Yeah, and the Leon, let's talk about Leon more. Sorry, I totally fumbled that sentence, but let's talk about Leon a little bit more and JB Smoove. I read this kind of long profile of JB Smoove maybe a couple months ago at this point. I don't know if you read this. I could probably find it. But one of the things they were talking about was how he ended up on the show and auditioning for the show. And there were interesting details of kind of coincidence or serendipity or whatever that factored into him having the opportunity. But apparently many people who auditioned for Curb were surprised to learn that they would be auditioning with Larry David.
Yeah.
But JB Smoove came into the room as Leon.
Okay.
And proceeded to make Larry David just crack up. Like there's like, who is this guy? You know? And if you think about Leon, who's been on the show now for quite a long time, I do think it's a real kind of turning point in terms of what Curb Your Enthusiasm is and the energy that he brings to the show. And certainly that plays a really big role in this episode we're talking about. I mean, I don't think you could do this episode without Leon.
Yeah. And it got me thinking about it. So Leon came in the show in season 6. He is part of a displaced New Orleans family that Larry and Cheryl take in after
Katrina.
Hurricane Katrina. Yeah. And so he and his family sort of play a role, and that was like back in 2007. So since then, he's been a part of this show.
I saw that season when it was airing.
Yeah.
And then he just won't leave.
They won't leave, and it hasn't really been since that season that they, I think, focused as much on race as they did in this final season, right? And particularly in this episode, particularly in how they focus on this commentary about the Georgia voting laws. And so it kind of made me wonder, he's not been afraid to tackle any topic, but it almost seemed to you like this is a message I want to get across in this last season to make sure I say something about these things I think are ridiculous before we are off the air forever. I went back and looked beyond the season. I think it was season 3 or 4 where Larry goes to Broadway to star in a show with David Schwimmer. It's always been in LA. And then this last season, large pieces of it take place in Atlanta. So it's kind of like, what was that decision? Why do it that way? And why focus on this one particular issue? They've never been afraid to do it, but the sort of presence of Leon, his family, and combined with these sort of serious issues made it an interesting way to send off the show to me.
Yeah, I mean, the broader context of the voting law in Georgia, which is a real thing. I was reading just today that apparently in New York, they just decided that the similar law is unconstitutional. It was also against the law in New York to give someone water and while they're waiting in line.
Yeah.
The difference being that in New York, it was one of those things that was like, this is a law from 1920 for some reason, or whatever. Yeah. And whereas in Georgia, it's like they passed that law a couple of years ago. So it's interesting context. And yeah, I mean, but in terms of what you were saying, I mean, I don't know how much of a point is being made. Part of what's almost refreshing about the kind of way that Curb Your Enthusiasm finds to deal with some of this stuff to me is that it doesn't feel like it's beating me over the head with a point, like a moral of the story. But Leon's definitely an opening for that, for sure.
Well, and that's what I think. I'm glad you said that's one specific thing, because this has always been a show about the things that Larry finds ludicrous or absurd or just have no point or no meaning. Just the whole rants about high occupancy traffic lanes and all sorts of different things that they've covered over the course of this series. But this became like, this is a commentary, it's a real-time commentary of what's happening in our country. And before it was just, it's idiotic that I can't walk into your store and use the bathroom. And then sort of they blow it up and magnify it to this real sort of real time focus on things that are going on. I don't know, obviously it's intentional, but intentional for a reason to do this in the last season, sort of say goodbye with this issue. I just found it interesting. And yeah, Leon and his family is sort of the vehicle to be able to do that.
Yeah, and Larry respects Leon.
Yes.
It is part of what makes their dynamic so great. I don't know why I'm feeling compelled to dig into this a little bit more, but with the going to the bathroom in the store thing, it's Leon who first says to him, he's like, "Well, you're gonna have to buy something, and that's going to be the rule. That's how it works,
Yep.
right?"
Yep.
It's like Leon knows how it's going to go almost. And there's like, "Oh, really? We'll see about that," But maybe because that also does feed into part of what ties that together with what happens with regard to his court case is the way that is shaped by social pressures. And I don't know what you think about that, but at the beginning of this episode, he's totally planning to plead guilty.
Yes.
And he's like, I'll plead guilty, get this over with, I go home, and everything else. And he actually seems to still be thinking that throughout the entire episode until that moment in Auntie Ray's cookout.
Yeah.
And because she wants him to plead not guilty, right? So I thought you were fighting for social justice, Larry. So even though all throughout the episode he's being praised by Bruce Springsteen and stuff, and he thinks that's pretty cool, he's kind of still planning to plead guilty, and then ultimately at the end,
yeah,
kind of pressured into pleading not guilty with no lawyer.
He's fine to get all of the accolades and all the praise, but doesn't want any of the work or advocacy to have to fall onto him. He's great being a local and national celebrity, but yeah, to actually have to do some work to fight for something or to work to change something, no, Larry's never interested in that.
Yeah, it's not as, and it's interesting dynamic. And then the Lawn Jockey itself, when I think about how this plays, part of what I think is interesting is Larry shows up at the Airbnb and he sees the Lawn Jockey. He's like, "What is that?" Right? He's offended, at least recognizes it as offensive.
Yeah.
Doesn't want it to be there already. And then, of course, when Leon shows up, redoubles that. But there's not really any kind of like statement about why it's offensive or anything like that. It's just like, obviously.
Yeah.
Come on.
Yeah. And some of the few minutes of digging that I did is that the lawn jockeys, at least the way they have evolved over the years, we see the one in the show, the older versions of them had characteristics that would be much, much more offensive and much more blatantly racist than the one that we saw there in the show, which they still is certainly offensive and certainly is something that is shown as this object to stand for something. But yeah, they were evolved from something that was from a time that used those in a lot of offensive ways.
Yeah, I mean, it's all kinds of stuff like this. I remember being in a thrift store in Tennessee, was visiting Tennessee, and this was 15 years ago. So it wasn't like right now, but 15 years ago was still pretty recently, just like looking at these salt and pepper shakers and stuff like this. There's like, yeah, there's a name for this kind of stuff, and it eludes me what I'm talking about. People probably know what I'm talking about. You live in Texas. Is that that kind of stuff in Texas? I don't want to assume one way or another, but I've never been to Texas.
Yes, as I've traveled a lot in Tennessee, I've traveled a lot in Arkansas. A lot of these states, there are, there's city Texas and there's rural Texas, and they are very, very different places for the most part. So yeah, you'll still see these types of things from time to time.
Interesting, because even in Michigan, Ohio, certainly in New York City, when spending time there, no, right, and I think that's part of how Larry reacts, is just like viscerally you can see that this is like, that's a no.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but culturally, they're where they are in Georgia, maybe not so much, or it's more complicated. It is
Yeah.
rather funny when they're going around and he's trying to get lawn jockeys from people, like when that at that point where they're seeing them in people's yards. And he's like talking to some guy with a baguette. He's like, "Well, this is where everybody says his sister, maybe." He's like, "She's an avowed racist," you
Yeah, I'd like to kill. Yeah.
know.
More confused about race. Oh my gosh. Just I mean, that's one of the things you love about this show. I want to bring up an episode is it it is something where Larry got to the point where he just did not care who I don't want to say he didn't care who he offended. He's not trying to offend anyone, but he's not going to care if is talking about the right things or if he is focusing on things that shouldn't be on television. If he's got an idea about something and the way that it should be and the way that it should work or the way that things shouldn't happen, he's going to go that direction. And it just became compounded year after year after year with the series, which made it even better.
Yeah, and there's something ridiculous to play with here. I don't have a line on this, but so they break the lawn jockey, and then of course they've got to replace it so that they don't lose the security deposit, and there's all of that, right? But then they can't find one. This scene at the store, where you mentioned the guy working at the store is Lionel Boyce, who's Marcus and the bear.
Yes.
It's a great little scene, but I thought this was quite funny because the store, it's like the Home Depot or whatever, sells white ones.
Right.
But then it's quite awkward when Larry tries to, yeah, maybe that are maybe a little.
And then asking if they have any black paint.
No, we don't have. And that was, I couldn't help but think throughout that scene, like, do they really not sell black paint?
Yeah, of course they do. Of course they do. No, but I did chuckle for a number of reasons at that scene. I think that Larry purposely found his complete opposite, right, in Lionel Boyce, right? Lionel is huge and bulking and I mean intimidating, standing there with his arms crossed the whole time. Talking to Larry is like find his opposite and make that be the guy that Larry has to confront. I mean, again, just more sort of nuance that brings out these stories.
But he's also soft spoken and professional, and I mean, but just kind of it probably adds to the humor, but in the character of Larry David on the show, it also
Yeah,
fits. I think that he doesn't fully explain himself in that
right.
scene. He could, but it seems like he
Yeah,
just not gonna. He's like, no, it's not. I got to replace it. Oh, so you already had one. It's like, I'm
exactly.
not
Yeah,
getting,
exactly.
not getting in all this.
Well, let me also ask you because so much of this episode focuses on a storyline revolved around Susie. It's her birthday. She's the one that's making him go look for this thing. I've read things that talk to people that eventually Susie really started to grate on them. Like they just got to the point where they could not stand
Eventually,
her character. Yeah. So I want to get your thoughts on Susie because I mean she is meant to serve a purpose in this show is to be the foil, obviously, to Jeff and to Larry, to be this loud sort of chalkboard scratching character that grates on them. So thoughts on Susie as you've seen some of the more recent things here.
I mean, I kind of thought she was always that. The important flip side is that she is also almost always correct.
Yes, yes, correct. Yeah.
So like, um, she functions in that way. I always felt in the show. I mean, some things are maybe. Uh, I wouldn't say, well, she's right about Jeff not being able to do other stuff on her birthday or whatever, but
Yeah.
you could, yeah, it makes makes sense,
Yeah. Yeah.
but with a
I
lot
just
of stuff,
I've always loved her as a character and I just I understand sort of I can't take so much of that it's she served a very important purpose in my mind of being a specific thing on that show.
she's like consistently calling out their shenanigans, and she's generally correct,
Yeah.
So I don't, I mean, I'm not gonna get down on Susie. is she potentially grating or whatever, or she's yelling at people? Yes, I think, kind of aesthetically or what have you. But I think it's important to
Her and Larry's
get it right.
arguments, her and Larry's arguments might be some of my favorite all time parts of this show over the 12 seasons, 24 years. I mean, just some of the things I would love to revisit.
Yeah, absolutely. We haven't done a Mocha Joe yet, have we? You mentioned in your summary of the
Joe,
episode. What do you think about the fact that they did this with the lawyer that looks like Mocha Joe and it's the same actor and all of this?
yeah, at first, and I have to say, maybe even the second or third time that I've seen it, couldn't quite figure out why they made that decision. For those that are not familiar, Mocha Joe is a storyline from season 10 where Larry wants to open up a rival coffee shop to Mocha Joe because he and Mocha Joe got into a disagreement about the things that he was ordering and the quality of his products. So this sort of hatred towards, this animosity towards Mocha Joe carrying over into a character that's supposed to look just like him, and by the way, is played by the same actor who played Mocha Joe. I couldn't quite understand what was the, other than let's just bring something back. What is the reason why we would do this? Because it doesn't, I was going to think, it doesn't serve the purpose of making him make a decision one or the other, whether he's going to plead guilty or not guilty. It doesn't, he's not in there more than this one episode this season. So what was the reason other than let's just revisit something?
Yeah. I mean, I guess it does give Larry a reason to fire his lawyer. Not necessarily a good reason, but one that we can relate to. We can understand, though, Larry David would do this. I just can't work with this guy. He reminds me of Mocha Joe too much. Just can't do it. And if you think about the rest of the season, that opens the door for a bunch of other stuff in terms of him having to find a new lawyer, and there's the whole storyline with the man, what is that guy's name?
Yeah, from Will and Grace.
Yeah, the guy from Will and Grace.
Yeah, I can't remember the name off the top of my head, but yeah, they're trying to figure out what to name his son, and his last name is Mantle. He wants him to name his son Mantle.
Yeah, that whole storyline, so I can see it in terms of the narrative structure of the season, how it functions, right? That potentially he starts out, Jeff has found him a perfectly good lawyer, right? And they'll take care of it. And, Larry can plead guilty, get a slap on the wrist, go home, story's over. But he fires that lawyer because the lawyer reminds him of Mocha Joe. Yeah. That allows for some kind of callback. There's some humor to that. And then it also means that by the end of this episode, he's pleading not guilty as pressured by Auntie Ray and so on, where, I don't know, maybe this lawyer, Joe, would have kept him from doing that. But
I think that's a good guess. Yeah.
And then he has to find a new lawyer, and we're down the path to all this other stuff that comes later. So
yes, his lawyer becomes Christopher Mantle, whose partner's last name is Zeckelman, and the Zeckelman Mantle family is trying to determine whether to name their adopted child Mantle or Zeckelman. And yeah, Larry cannot fathom the thought of them naming him Zeckelman over Mantle. But yeah, you're right. I mean, it just becomes a pathway to deliver more of these guest spots, more of these characters, more of the story that will come later on. And like you said, circling back to, a lawyer would have talked Larry out of pleading not guilty to this thing.
In all likelihood, yeah. As we talked about before, I fell behind, and the first time I watched this episode, I wasn't familiar with Mocha Joe. I went and watched some clips on YouTube and stuff like that. I probably could have watched just full episodes, but I didn't know exactly where they were or whatever. Anyway, I familiarized myself with Mocha Joe.
Yeah.
And so I think it works. You have that seed of animosity, and use the opportunity to bring back another actor who's been in the show previously and so on. But
it is sort of a good representation for so much of this show is Larry would be able to succeed at things if he was only able to get out of his own way so many times. That so much of what happens to him is not all the other people that he disdains and thinks they're so awful. It's what he does. And this is just another representation of that.
Yeah, and particular things he can't get over, right? Like in the season premiere where he's been the whole reason he's in Atlanta is to appear at this guy's party and he can't get over the whole nickname thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um so, little things like that. But then these other moments where he is like he's successfully pressured in this episode by the salesperson at the store to buy that jacket.
Yes.
Um and he gives the jacket to his friend from jail who gets arrested for wearing the jacket with the tags on it. It's all these little moments.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's humorous stuff. This is a good episode.
Yeah, it is. It is good, and there's so many. I think from the 10 episodes in the last season, there were some real classic things, some good callbacks, some things that we could have gotten into that were much more even more offensive, more controversial, more that have been difficult to talk about on a podcast. But this is one I think just really encapsulates the spirit of what this show was, what the Larry, Jeff, Leon relationship is, and just how Larry had just spent 24 years with us getting involved in these things and of his own doing and not being able to find a way out.
Yeah. Anything else you want to dig into? What does it say about Ryan that Ryan chose this episode from the past year? Did you have other contenders in
I
on
think
your
that
list?
I don't know that I considered much else. I think we've talked for a couple of weeks about, I would have included 2 or 3 episodes of The Bear, but since we're just about to talk about The Bear, I didn't want to go that route. I think just if I psychoanalyze myself, one of the reasons I always was attracted to this show is often find myself having very strong opinions and thinking things should be a certain way, but I am the anti Larry David when it comes to confronting people about when I see these types of things happening. And I've often looked at myself saying, oh, that's sort of an idyllic state for me to be able to go and speak my mind like that. But that's just in real life, that doesn't seem to be who I am.
Yeah, I'm very similar. Throughout the course of Curb Your Enthusiasm, I found that I very often agree with Larry David, and the difference is um, I'd let it go, I'd swallow it, I
Yeah,
wouldn't push it or whatever. But the thing is, Ryan, if the show teaches us anything, we've got better strategy. We've
that's
got better life strategy because the show's constantly like, you can't let it go. He's pushing it, and
that's right. That's
you
right.
know, bad
Oh
stuff
yeah.
happens.
Not Larry's way of living is not necessarily the way I want to live. So that's a good lesson after 24 years of watching it, I guess.
Yeah, there is something funny about seeing him do it. Um, so good. A couple things in here we maybe didn't hit on as much as we could have. I don't know, the two gifts thing. Um,
Yeah, not a strategy I've tried before. So we'll just
one
rely.
one one point of clarification in terms of how you put it in your summary, at least is how I read it. It wasn't that he got her two gifts in case she didn't like the first one. It was buy her two gifts. And if she likes the first one enough, then you return the second one. But if she seems like she not so
Yeah,
sure, like it's enough, then you give her the second more
yeah.
expensive gift. It's
Don't
like,
don't
will
worry.
the cheaper
I got
gift
a better
do
one
it?
coming.
Which
I mean, it's actually a good strategy. One that's tricky to deploy, I'm sure, but not one I've tried myself.
no, it's not a terrible strategy if you play it. If you pull it off with sufficient tact or whatever, which they don't because there has to be a ring camera and Susie sees that
Yeah,
with the
yeah.
with the second gift and all of that because of course she does. Um, but yeah, so Curb Your Enthusiasm's over. We had briefly on here before about reacting to the finale. Don't need to go into that again.
Yeah, one of these just again cultural touchstones for so many years. There'll be some imitators of this over the years. I'm sure there'll be some things that try to replicate it, but getting this level of I think authenticity and humor will be tough to duplicate.
My bigger question almost is will Larry David go on to do something else?
I have the same question. Yeah.
You know, if he's done with Curb Your Enthusiasm, they really did end it pretty definitively, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, he can always just say, "Hey, we're going to make another season anyway," you
Yeah.
know. But does he have other projects in him that'll pursue moving forward? Seems like maybe, maybe not.
Yeah. He's only 76. He's got some years left in him.
Yeah, right. I mean, he's not. He could,
Yeah.
I just don't know. He's been doing this one for so long, so we'll see. Anyway, been a pleasure talking about this episode with you, Ryan. We're
Yes,
going to move
sir.
on from here for the next couple of weeks to choose our favorite shows from the past year,
Yeah.
right?
We're on now again from one episode to an entire season or as much of a season as we can encompass from the past year. And you have picked one I probably would have picked, but we're gonna let you have it.
Stole it.
So what are we gonna talk about next week?
Now I chose first. So I guess I was at the ready. Um, we're going to talk about the curse, and I think that should be interesting to dig into a bit more than we've had the chance to previously.
Yeah.
We've talked about it a little bit before on the pod, but go into some depth. I don't know that we'll take the time to be rewatching every episode in the next week, but spoilers will be on the table, so people will join us for that.
Yeah, and I would say, I know you would give this show the highest recommendation. I would say it's definitely worth using your free week of subscription to Paramount Plus to binge it before we talk. I think it's worth worth using it on this show.
It is, but also, right, I almost can't imagine binging it. I mean, I watched it week to week personally. And then I recall writing something like about the point of it being to make you suffer. Um, anyway, Curse is really good. People are familiar from Nathan Fielder, Benny Safdie, Stone's in it. Yeah, you can check it out on Paramount Plus with Showtime. I think Showtime was the branding on this one,
Oh
but
yeah, that's right. Yeah.
regardless. Um, so we'll talk about the curse next week. In the meantime, you can check out TVObsessive.com. You can find articles on the curse there. I did write something on the finale of Curb Your Enthusiasm. There's some other little stuff about Curb Your Enthusiasm you can find on there. Any number of articles about other TV shows. Hopefully you'll check it out, poke around, follow TV Obsessive on social media. If you've enjoyed the podcast, please do leave us a good rating and review on the YouTube channel. Press that subscribe button, give a thumbs up, and so on and so forth. And we'll see you next week.
All right. Looking forward to it. See you then.